everyone. Welcome to the global webinar of Millennium Fellowship. I hope all of you are doing well in this challenging time. My name is Prajwal Bikram Rana, and I'm a final year law student. I'm the campus director of Kathmandu School of Law, Nepal, and I'm the moderator for today's session. First of all, I would like to request all of you to turn on your video if possible, because that will make the session lively. Additionally, I would also request all of you to introduce yourself in the chat box with your name, your country's name, and the university you are representing. I'm very happy to see all of you here today, and thank you for joining today's session. The agenda for today is that we are going to have 20 minutes question answer session with the guest speaker. After that, we are going to have questions from the fellows for 30 minutes to the speaker. Therefore, if you have any questions for the speaker, feel free to drop them in the chat box. Okay, now I am seeing that some of you have started introducing yourself. Please continue to introduce yourself. I would like to introduce our guest speaker for the day. Today we have Cassie Crockett, who is the Director and Head of Strategy at Schmidt Futures. She has earned her JD from Yale Law School and is a member of Colorado Bar Association. She holds a BA in Political Science from Yale. As a Director and Head of Strategy at Schmidt Futures, Cassie leads strategy development with a particular focus on RISE program. She oversees the development of new programs for approval and coordinates efforts with partner organizations. Prior to Schmidt Futures, Cassie worked for McKinsey and Company, a global consulting firm where she specialized in education technology and served as Chief of Staff of the Social Sector Office. During her time at McKinsey, Cassie managed relationships with and projects for clients, while also working with firm leadership to refine McKinsey's long-term strategy for social impact. Cassie was also a core member of the global efficacy team of Pearson, the world's largest learning company. That team helped to design and implement a business-wide transformation with the goal of improving learner outcomes around the globe. I see some of the fellows are joining still. So I would again request all of you who have joined just now to introduce yourself in the chat box. Now I would like to request our guest speaker to give some initial remarks for the session and say hello to the fellows.
Sure. Thank you, Prajwal. Hi, everyone. It is really nice to see all of you. I am so grateful that you've joined from as many time zones as you've joined from. I've seen in the chat that we're going all the way to 2 o'clock in the morning in Australia, and I'm very grateful for your time and honored that you were willing to give it. So first off, would love to just quickly thank MCN and the United Nations Academic Impact for launching the Millennium Fellowship, as well as thanking the Millennium Fellowship Program and all of the Millennium Fellows for your work making the world around us better. Just one other note is I've seen in the chat that there are quite a few people that are in states in the US that are currently finishing counting ballots, including some folks at ASU. And just wanted to say, I know it's been an exhausting week, especially for those of us in the United States. And it makes it sort of, from my point of view, it makes it even more clear how important it is to invest in young people around the world, because this is an example of an election where young people appear to have really made their voices heard, which is incredibly inspirational. So first off, I'll just quickly introduce myself, my background, and tell you a little bit about what I'm working on, but would love to spend most of the time answering any questions that you all have, either about work, about potential professional pathways, things like that. So as Prajwal said, my name is Cassie. I am the head of strategy at Schmidt Futures. Schmidt Futures is a philanthropic initiative that was founded by Eric and Wendy Schmidt. Eric Schmidt was formerly the CEO of Google and then the executive chairman of Alphabet, the parent company. And he and Wendy have been philanthropic for a very long time. Wendy in particular has been a leader on issues like ocean health and climate change over many years. And Schmidt Futures is one of the family's newer philanthropic entities. And we focus on how you can invest in people as you think about ways to make the world better. So our entire mission at Schmidt Futures is to find really talented people, people with a big idea, and help them make those ideas real. And in doing so, make the world around them better. So what I've been working on over the last year is the launch of our earliest ever people-focused program, which looks for young people aged 15 to 17 from around the world, and will, over the course of their lives, give them support as they use their talents to serve other people. So what could that look like? For example, it could look like finding a kid. We met this really extraordinary girl in South Africa who in the near term needed tools like technology, financial support to get to college, but we want to, work with people like that over the course of their lives to give them not just a boost to get to university, but also support them as they start thinking about their careers, eventually be there when they're looking for seed funding to get their social enterprise ideas off of the ground. We like the idea of sort of progressively supporting people as they scale up their impact over the course of their career, and making it so that no one ever has to choose not to serve other people because they lack the opportunity to do so. So that's the vision of RISE. I would also just say, our programs focus generally on empowering people to make the world around them better. One thing that I think is so special about the Millennium Fellowship is that it shares a very similar theory, which is that the tools to accomplish our goals can't be separated from the people that are inventing and testing and scaling up those tools. And what I think is so inspiring about the program is that it looks not just for leaders that have an idea, it also looks for empathy and inclusion, affirmation of basic human values and rights. And I think that is a mission that sort of is very central to all that we do at Schmidt Futures as well. And so I'm immensely grateful that you've all taken the time from your days, because I know that you're working on big, important things. And I'm excited to hear more about your ideas and more about sort of how you're thinking about the future. Because as I said, at our institution, it is our belief that young people, and specifically young people with big ideas, are highly likely to change the world around them. And we're excited to be there to learn from you as you do it. So with that, I think just one other thing I would offer before we transition into questions is I'm a big believer that people can have windy pathways, and that you don't have to have a direct shot into exactly the thing that you want to do for your career off the bat. So for example, I went directly into the private sector for a couple of years. I eventually went to law school. I'm not practicing as a lawyer right now. I've sort of tested a couple of different things to feel what was a good fit for me. Eventually, I landed on this idea of, I was excited about Schmidt Futures because I was excited to build a new philanthropy, start something from scratch, and think about social impact as a core part of my work. But just want to affirm that exploration is good, and that for lots of folks, it will make much more sense to bounce around and try things out and explore different pathways. And it's never a failure if you find that you have to change pathways midway through. In fact, you learn a lot along the way. And in my case, at least, I ended up in a much more interesting place because I did that. So with that, would love to start off with Prajwal, and then hear any questions that the group might have, and excited to meet all of you.
Thank you so much, Cassie. So with this, I would like to continue the session with some questions that we have prepared. Also, I request fellows, if they have any questions, they can just write down in the chat box, and we can go through it after our first half of the session. So I would like to start with the first question to you. Our first question is, you currently lead the strategy development of Schmidt Futures and oversee the newly launched program RISE. So what has the process been like to launch a new program? And how do you ensure that your set strategy is scalable, sustainable, and centered on social good? So that was my first question. Okay.
Sure. Um, I think lots of people on this call probably know this. The process of launching new stuff is fun, but really messy. So in the case of Rise, we a year ago next week, so it's been 51 weeks now, we made two announcements. The first was that Eric and Wendy announced a $1 billion philanthropic commitment to developing talent in their philanthropy. And that day, we also announced that we were building a new program, which I talked about, Rise, that would be the anchor program of that dollar commitment. And so over the past year, since we announced that we were getting started on this program, we've been getting ready for the launch of our first ever application process. And we've learned a ton along the way. I think for me, the biggest thing that I've taken away from starting new things a couple of times now is that you're often right about a lot at the beginning, but there's no way you're right about everything. And it's very important to test your hypotheses and see what works and what doesn't, and not consider it a failure when you find things that don't work and you need to change them. So one example to this is when we first launched Rise, I was sort of leading on the initial thinking of the program. And when we were thinking about, okay, how are we going to find these people that we want to support over the course of their lives? And I was sort of imagining like a juiced up college application where it would be like, write us an essay and give us your test scores and give us your GPA and give us a teacher recommendation, like a pretty regimented, typical process that people would go through. But we knew that we wanted it to be available on mobile. And so we started working with Sal Khan and a team that he chairs to build out what the application pathway could look like. And really quickly, we found that if we had done what I originally imagined, the like fancier college application, we would have gotten way worse information about a lot of young people, because the baselines around the world are really different, because standardized testing approaches around the world are really different, because the ability for kids to write essays on their phone often depends on the phone and not on anything to do with the kid. And so we actually threw out our initial approach to how we were going to approach that application process. And over the past year, we've been building something that I think is a lot cooler than where I actually started. It's an application portal that allows for video recordings for kids who have phones that enable it, other pathways for kids that don't have phones that enable it, and that collects a much richer set of information so that you're not just looking at numbers when you're figuring out how someone's potential could shape up over the course of their lives. And I think that, that reflects this learning that you just don't know everything at the beginning. And it wasn't a failure that we found that there was a better way to go. It was a success. And the most important thing for me to learn has been to embrace that change and embrace when you get new information and not be afraid to change your approach as you get it. And Prajwal, just to the second part of your question, how to ensure that the strategy is sustainable and has positive social impact over time. It's a similar theory where I think you've just got to try stuff and test it and see what works. So we have a strategy that we believe will have good longevity, that we believe could truly change the world and change both the lives of young people, but also give them the power to solve big global problems. But if we try it for a couple of years and we find that it's not the right thing and that there need to be changes that get made, I think it requires some fearlessness about making those changes as you learn more. And it requires you to be adaptable and willing to absorb new information and not believe that you know everything off of the bat.
Thank you so much, Casey. I guess our fellows learned something from this answer because you may implement it in your projects. Now I'd like to move towards the second question, that is how you have adjusted your strategy on building and maintaining partnerships to achieve your program goals. And from your experience, how can young leaders secure partnerships to scale their work and create change, especially during this time, during the,
Sure,
yeah.
sure. I mean, I think that this will be for folks that are doing work that is international, this will probably ring true for you. Uh, Another thing that we learned very early on is that, um, you know, it would have been so for Rise to be successful, we need to reach young people where they are around the world. That challenge has gotten much more significant in 2020 as COVID has resulted in people's schedules being highly disruptive, in people often not being able to safely go to the places in person that they used to be able to safely go, and the financial strain that families and individuals are feeling and the pressures that come along with that financial strain. And so, you know, what seemed like a challenging task in 2019 of reaching kids around the world became much, much more challenging in 2020. Um, but what we asked ourselves is, you know, how can we make lemonade out of these lemons? How can we find a way to use this moment in time to meet kids where they are, even if it requires thinking really differently about how to do that than we'd initially imagined? And for us, the answer to that was partnerships. So we have been heavily reliant on partnerships with organizations around the world that have been working with young people for a very long time, that know community circumstances, that know the circumstances of the individual young people that they serve, and that can really help us say, you know, right now, how do we find a kid in Brazil versus Zimbabwe versus India? And without partnerships with institutions with that local grounding, it's really hard for me to imagine that we would be able to get the type of reach that we know we need to get. So for us, partnerships were already a core part of the strategy, and COVID made that even more important for us because the challenges of reaching folks where they are increased so exponentially over the course of 2020. And so, you know, as we've thought about how to how to work with those partners to create change and how to use those partnerships to their fullest effect, I think one of the questions that we always ask is, how can this be mutually good? So how can this advance our goals at the same time as it advances the goals that the partners are chasing? Because so often in the social impact space, you're not competing with each other. You're sharing a pathway to bring the world where you want it to go, which is a completely different mindset than in the private sector, where, you know, someone that is also serving a similar demographic could be seen as a competitor in some way. And so every partnership conversation that we've gone into, we've gone in with this frame of what could we do together that would make our program more effective, but that would also improve what you're able to do and help you meet your goals even better. And that orientation has made it a lot easier to find common ground with partners, which, as I said earlier, has been probably the most important thing that we've had to prioritize in 2020.
Thank you. So I can see some fellows sharing their LinkedIn account link and WhatsApp group. So please, some of you have joined right now, so please keep on introducing yourself. Now I would like to move towards another question, that is, given your work in supporting young people in creating change, what career advice do you have for Millennium Fellows as we begin our social impact journeys and careers?
I love this question because everyone's going to have such different pathways, and that's such a good thing. I think that's one of the things that's the most special about the Millennium Fellowship is just the diversity of directions that folks can go in. You know, I think the biggest thing that I would say is, and I touched on this earlier, but it is totally okay to try stuff and see if it works, and if it doesn't, to change. And the most interesting careers are usually not the ones that follow a completely linear pathway. Oftentimes, they're the ones that hop around a little bit, either geographically, in terms of industry, in terms of exactly what you're working on, because those are the folks that have given themselves the space to explore and the space to really ask, you know, what gives me energy, what gives me joy, what what type of work makes me want to like leap out of bed in the morning and dig my hands into it over the course of the day. So I would encourage all of the Millennium Fellows to ask themselves those questions about, what could I be doing that would bring me lots of joy and energy, and to not be afraid to make changes where you find that might not be happening. I personally did this with the legal field, so I definitely get it. I think the other thing that I would say is just that I think the entire world is looking to your generation, not just for hope, but also for big ideas and big solutions. The younger generation today is the one that is going to be the most affected by systemic issues like climate change. And all over the world, you see the mobilization of young people around long-term issues that don't always get prioritized. And I think it's inspiring, but it puts a lot of pressure on you guys because I really do believe that the world is watching for your ideas, for your contributions, for your impact, because you've got a better sense of what will come into sharp focus in the future as the most important issues for your generation to navigate. I am just on a personal note, I'm currently expecting a child. And one of the things that makes me the most optimistic about that kid's future is knowing that there is this whole generation of young leadership coming up with a dedication to serving other people over the course of their lives. It's incredibly inspiring.
Thank you, Casey. I would also request our fellows to drop down the questions that they have in the chat box. Now that I would like to move towards my last question, and then we would start the question answer session from the fellows. So my last question to you is, I'm curious to learn about how you have explored different career paths and what got you into shifting from the private sector to now working with Schmidt Futures.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of it was that I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do when I was leaving college. I thought that I was going to be a journalist for most of college, and then actually tried being a journalist and found pretty quickly that it was not what was going to be a permanent fit for me. And so I did what tons of people do, and I went into consulting because I had no idea what to do besides go into consulting. And for me, it was a really nice choice at that moment in my career because it allowed me to dabble in a couple of different fields and sectors and companies and have a broader range of experiences over a short period of time. But, I think as time went on, I knew that I wanted to work on problems that I felt would sort of serve the world around me and that I felt could result in building a better future for my community, but also just generally for other people. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to do instead of law, I had that social impact anchor in my brain. And I was also really excited at the prospect of building something new and seeing what it was like to start something from scratch. And very fortunately, I was able to do both of those things at the same time at Schmidt Futures. And I think that if that had not been possible, then I would have had to pick which one of those to prioritize. I'm not totally sure what I would have picked, but I got really lucky from a timing point of view. And I think that some of that was that I was very open to working outside of the field that I was operating in at that moment. So it's mental openness to opportunity.
Okay. So I'm also in my final year, and now it's time to think about career. And I'm also a little bit confused.
You'll be great. There's no wrong answer.
Okay, so now I would like to start with the question answer session from fellows. We have first question from Brooke Ramos. I would like to request Brooke to ask the question. And first of all, I would also request to introduce yourself, your name, your university's name, and your country's name. Brooke, you can ask the question.
Hi, Cassie. Thank you for being here. My name is Brooke. I'm a senior at UNC Charlotte in North Carolina, USA. I'm co-director for our cohort on campus as well. My question sort of revolves around the daily work that you have or that you're doing with Schmidt Futures. Do you involve any Scrum Master principles in the work that you do?
It's funny, we never use that language, but I actually think the answer is yes. So I think the parts of the Scrum framework that I would point to as being important to our work day to day would be that sense of agility and change. And so while most of the time we're not doing tons of like in-house software development, I think the idea of building something quickly, testing it, and changing it very quickly is pretty resonant across our work. And I also think that as you can imagine, one of our founders is very oriented towards how we can use processes that work really well in the tech sector to scale up our impact. And so while we don't use Scrum as a term, I think that a lot of the principles actually end up overlapping with the way that we operate day to day.
Okay. So now we have question from Sairchana Darira. Sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. Sairchana Darira. If you are there, can you ask a question?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, thank you so much for an amazing webinar. My question is, what advice do you have for students struggling with imposter syndrome when presented with unique opportunities like global leadership and just like creating projects that are very unique and rare, and just like being placed in these like unique positions? I kind of like makes them question if they even are like credible or like reliable for them.
I love that question. And like, this is something that I have spent a ton of time thinking about. And I know that a lot of my colleagues have spent a lot of time thinking about it too. I mean, this is like a very, I'm not sure that this is like advice for people in general or more like a personal answer of how I've thought about this. I think on the front end of like convincing myself to do stuff despite feeling like an imposter, the trick for me was often to convince myself that everyone else around me was faking it too, and that it was okay if I felt like I was faking a little bit. But there were also like little tiny rituals that I would do just to make myself more comfortable before situations where I knew that I would start feeling that way. So for a while, whenever I did public speaking of any sort, I would blush, and I would blush kind of visibly. And so I started thinking about what my rituals could be to keep myself from blushing, or to be able to conceal that I was blushing, things like that. Because I was like, I know that everyone else is faking it and everyone else feels nervous, and I just have to find a way to not like spiral in moments like that. I think the bigger thing for me that's been hard on the back end is, and this is very personal and definitely won't be relevant to everyone on the call, but I think one thing that can be hard is for people that deal with imposter syndrome, once you get somewhere, like once you get a job, once you get an investment, you can feel the need to be completely perfect all the time in order to continually justify why you got that job, why you got that investment. And, you know, good performance is important. It's important to have attention to detail, but it is also completely impossible for any one person to be perfect all the time. So for me, I actually one year made it my New Year's resolution to regularize the feeling of disappointing other people and like letting other people down sometimes, just because I had so much personal discomfort with doing that. And so for the year of, I think this was in 2018, I said every week, I know that at some point I'm going to disappoint someone. I'm going to be like, sorry, I know I told you that I would have that document to you on Tuesday. It's not coming till Wednesday. Or sorry, I know you had asked me to go to this thing for you. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time, because I was so uncomfortable with doing that. And so I said for that year that every week I would disappoint someone, and I would call it out to myself and sometimes to them in that moment and say like, hey, you're my disappointment of the week. I'm really sorry, but it's just like going to be this way. And for me, by owning that and saying like, this is something that I'm actively working on and this is something that I'm thinking about, it actually really helped me, because as soon as I started saying like, you know, sorry person, you're not getting that document from me today, you find that people are like, oh, that's okay. And they don't think of you any differently. And just regularizing that feeling went a really long way for me emotionally. And I think that for anyone that suffers from imposter syndrome, because it's not like a thing you overcome once. It's a continuous cycle of feeling like you have to be perfect in order to earn stuff. I would really encourage you to think about that type of approach. Everyone's different, but it worked for me.
Thank you. So we have next question from Masa Haddad. I would like to request all the fellows to start with the introduction and then ask the question. Yeah, Masa.
Hi, Cassie. First off, thank you so much for this wonderful webinar. My name is Masa Haddad. I'm a senior at Cornell University, but I'm currently back home in Jordan. I have a question about your work with McKinsey as a start, because I heard that you, if I'm not mistaken, you were working in social work in McKinsey. And I know a lot of people around me are getting these like high-tech consulting jobs, but I'm always like, oh no, I kind of want to work in the social impact kind of sector. So can you talk about how those two work together for you?
Yeah, totally. So when I joined McKinsey, for my first year and a half, I did a little bit of everything. It was like my clients ranged from, washing machine manufacturing to pet food to the public sector. It was just kind of all over the map. And the reason for that was that I think especially when you're new, the most important thing for me to solve for was working with good people that would coach me and help me, build my toolkit and help me navigate being in the workforce full time for the first time. And after about a year and a half at McKinsey, similar to what you're describing, I started thinking to myself, like, I really want to make sure that I can have that anchor of positive social impact, because when I think about what gives me energy, that's a big one, is feeling like I'm contributing in some way. And so I actually just started kind of like marketing myself internally as looking for opportunities, especially in what McKinsey then called the social sector office, which was education, public health, economic development, things like that. And I used the mentors that I built over the last year and a half to say, it's really important to me that I do this type of work. I feel like I need that to help rebuild some of my energy. And for me, I think that I ended up spending a fellowship year at McKinsey being dedicated to that work. I spent some additional time other than that fellowship year doing work in that field. And I think for me, it was personally pretty useful to have both types of experience. Like, it was useful to do the generalist thing. It was useful to see as broad a range of companies as I saw. But once I started doing social sector work, it sort of acted as confirmation that I was right, that I would get a lot of energy from that type of contribution. And so once I started, it was a little bit of an addiction, and it was hard to get back off of it. Even when I went back into the private sector after that to Pearson, the goal of my team was still to advance learner outcomes, was to ensure that kids were learning as much as possible. And I think it's valuable to test different stuff, but if you find that you're really motivated by theses like that, there are lots of pathways through which you can pursue them.
Okay. Now we have a question from Jose Lin Bianco. If you are there, please ask a question starting with your introduction. Yeah.
That's good. Thank you. Hi, Cassie. Thank you very much for this webinar so far. I really appreciate it. My name is Fossey. I'm from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California, in the United States. And my question for you is, what was a powerful learning or teaching moment you had in your life?
Oh, I love that question, Fossey. I think that one of the big, I'm worried about getting overly political here, but I'm just going to lean into it. It's fine. The 2016 election was a big learning moment for me. I was living in New York at the time. I'm originally from Utah, which is for folks' context, it's a very small, very conservative place. And I think at the moment of the 2016 presidential election, I was in that place that I described earlier, where I was sort of thinking, I'm excited about social impact. I'm also excited about starting something new. How do I balance both of those things? How do I prioritize? Can I do both? Can I do one? And then Donald Trump won the presidency. And for me at that moment, I think the learning that I had was that the world around me was changing in ways that I didn't feel like I'd fully understood up until then. And at that moment, the decision of whether social impact would be a priority kind of got made for me. It felt really hard to imagine a career that didn't feel grounded in building a more equitable and inclusive world when that particular event happened. So without getting overly political, I think world events in 2016 significantly changed the way that I was prioritizing my own personal career decision making.
Do you think that did shift from 2016 till today?
I think that, I ended up joining Schmidt Futures really quickly after that. And I think that one of the things that I've learned is that the trade-off that I thought I had to make between entrepreneurship and starting something and working in social impact was not a real trade-off. And that there are actually a lot of people that think that way. And there are a fair amount of opportunities that are out there for folks that are excited about building new stuff and that are also excited about measuring their careers in terms of impact. So the last 4 years have definitely affirmed that to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fosse and Cassie. Now we have a question from Grace Shaw. So if you can unmute yourself and start your question with the introduction.
Yeah, of course. Good morning. My name is Grace. I'm studying at Griffith University in America, Australia.
Like 2 o'clock in the morning where you are. I'm amazed that you can say anything. So
I wish I was in America, but it would be 2 a.m. I'm very excited to be here though. So thank you. I am a psych student, and so as a part of that, when I'm working with people, I draw on a lot of my own experiences with my own mental illness when working with people. So I was wondering what experiences that you're comfortable with sharing that have inspired you in your work. And I was also wondering what your current personal and professional goals are for the future.
Yeah, I think to take those in reverse order, my current sort of like thinking on the future is that it's been really fun to be a part of the founding team from Schmidt Futures because, we've gone from a tiny group of people that could fit around the same lunch table every day to now I think we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 at this moment over the last couple of years. And in the future, eventually I want to go through that process again. I would be very excited to start something new. I'm not planning on doing that imminently or anytime soon, but I loved the build process, and one of my goals will be to go through the build process again because I learned so much, and there's so much I would do differently. And then I think that when I think about an inspirational or sort of like transformational thing for me, is that a fair restatement of the question? Something that, yeah. I think that, when I was in law school, I was a member of a clinic. So in the States, you can't fully practice law until after you graduate from law school and pass the bar exam. But there are a couple of opportunities that law students get where under faculty supervision, they can give some legal advice in a limited and regulated way to clients. And when I was in law school, I was in a clinic that served kids that were at risk of being put into the foster care system or already in the foster care system. So oftentimes these were young people whose families were going through a crisis, who were experiencing intervention by the state. And one thing that was very cool was that we actually represented the young people in that context. We didn't represent the state, we didn't represent the parent. Our entire job was to be the representation for the young person that was at risk of interacting with the system. And one of the things that most changed me as I was doing that work was it put everything into a completely different perspective, because, you know, I would leave my federal income taxation class and be like, I'm so stressed. I have all of this reading that I have to do. I have to outline all of this stuff so that I'll be ready for exams when the time comes. And then, you know, you go spend time with a kid, which already tends to put things into really clear perspective. But it's not just any kid, it's a kid that's going through a crisis and that's navigating one of the most challenging, in many cases, the most challenging part of their life up to that moment. And one thing that really changed me through that process was just understanding that my own stresses and anxieties could be put into perspective relative to the experiences that other people were going through. And that, you know, I found pretty quickly that if I had a finite amount of energy, it was very easy for me to prioritize giving that energy to work that would help young people versus feeling like I needed to hold a lot of it in reserve for my federal income taxation class. And that experience, I also had an incredible professor for that. And that experience, I think, really changed the way that I approach spending my time and thinking about service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Cassie. Now we have a question from Ashish Paudil. If you are there, Ashish, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Hello. Thank you so much, Prajwal, the moderator. Hello, Casey. I'm Ashish Paudil from Kathmandu School of Law here in Nepal. I'll ask my question. The question is, what do you suggest to the student who want to perform social impact by joining the older institution instead of a startup or a new one? And the reason that I asked this question is because the natural law for young people like us does not sometimes resonate with the older people or due to the generation gap. Things that should have been normal does not seem to be normal for the people who are ahead, but normal for us. So creating a conflict or a situation where we feel like more than the older institution or the institution that are important for the country, maybe a startup or the institutions might work for us rather than going through the older ones. So what do you suggest to the student? Probably my line of reasoning also have an implicit question for you, but the direct question to you remains the same. Thank you so much, Casey.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of it depends on the person. So there are going to be people that get lots of joy out of the feeling of constructing something new, and there are going to be, and for that you could sort of think about the metaphor like building the plane as you fly it. But there are also a lot of people, and some of the smartest people in the world, that get lots of joy out of what you would describe as turning an aircraft carrier around, where if you are a part of a huge institution, including an older institution, and you can get that big institution to change its angle a little bit towards social impact, if you can be a part of that redirection, you have the possibility to have huge impact. And so this theory was what attracted me to Pearson at the moment that I went. It was the biggest education company in the world. It served more learners than any other education company in the world. And if you thought about the possible impact of just angling them a little bit more in this direction, it's huge because you touch so many people. And, you know, so I would say that there's not a wrong answer for big institution, for small institution. There are pathways to working on social impact in both places. People will feel, some people will feel much more supported in each different type of institution. It's that question though of believing that you feel like you can steer that aircraft carrier a little bit.
Yeah, but I think the reason I asked this question because young people are nowadays, because of many influencer medias and all, we are more so much of a get success as fast as possible.
Mhm.
So in an old institution, I don't find it that well. So that's
Oh
the
yeah.
kind of reason. Yeah. Thank you so much.
No. Well, and I think, if you think of some of the, you look at COVID and some of the most unglamorous agency like careers that people have had are going to be the ones that have the biggest effect. So like the folks that work at the FDA to make sure that there are processes for vetting vaccines and thinking about how to distribute those vaccines, like those are not historically the like Y Combinator quick success type jobs, but those jobs are going to be completely transformational as soon as a vaccine is on the table, and they'll ultimately be what makes their country safe and what helps all of us get back to the life that we're expecting. And so I'm a huge believer that there are like institutions of all sizes where you can find that type of social impact. Some will be fast, some will be slow, some will feel better to you than others. That's totally okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, we have a question from Innocent. If you are there, Innocent, can you unmute yourself and ask a question? Innocent Oku.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yep.
you are.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. Innocent Uko, logging in all the way from Nairobi, Kenya. We have a blackout. That's why you can't quite see any face on your screen. But my question is, what is a small thing that you've noticed in Schmidt Ventures that has the biggest impact on the company? Since you are inside the company, I guess there's those small nuggets that you get to interact with that we can't really see. So what is this small thing that you've noticed in Schmidt Ventures that has one of the biggest impacts?
Yes.
In the company?
I love this question because I think that little rituals are often the biggest thing that people remember about the culture that they sit inside of. At the beginning of the pandemic, when we all went remote for a while, we were concerned about team connectivity and making sure that people felt connected to each other's work, to each other's personal lives, that they could sort of be there to support one another. And one of my colleagues, this woman, Candace, came up with an idea where at the end of every single team meeting that we do, so at least weekly, we hold 5 minutes to do something that she calls shout outs, where it's just a completely open floor and people can give shout outs to colleagues that have done particularly cool work things, that have been especially supportive personally, that have overcome something over the past week. And they range from huge, like shout out to this person for launching a new program, to small, like shout out to this person who saw that I was having a bad day and knew to call me at the end of it. And that, like, those rituals of public affirmation that we're all trying to help each other. I didn't realize at the time how important they would turn out to be, but I think that it's now entered our team lexicon, not just to give shout outs, but also to sort of publicly and positively affirm one another when we can. And it's less than 5 minutes a week that makes a huge difference culturally.
Okay, thank you, Innocent. Now we have a question from Israel Smart. So Israel, if you are there, please unmute yourself and you can start your question with your introduction. Yeah.
All right. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
All right. My name is Smart Israel from Nigeria, and I am a Millennium Fellow with the University of Jos. I'm studying medicine and surgery. My question to you, Cassie, is, in this part of the world, supporting partners who are going to be involved in your social impact project is quite difficult. So what advice will you give us in regards to supporting partners and making them involved in your social impact project? Also, how do we seed funding for our initiative? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that the answer is probably different from place to place. So I'll share the way that we think about this at Schmidt Futures. So for us, we think about two different categories of ways that we can find partners to work with. Category one is, in some way through our existing network. So we know them, we know someone that knows them, we know someone that knows someone that knows them. It's the sort of like how many degrees of separation are around you that you can use to vet both the quality, but also the overall focus and priorities of a partner's work. So one example here would be, we've worked with the Rhodes Trust on a couple of our biggest programs, and they have introduced us to a few partner organizations that they know of in the UK that we never would have found on our own, but that we were able to find because they were a part of a secondary network. But, that's way one of identifying partners. I think way two recognizes that, the risk of always turning back to your network is that you can end up sitting inside of an echo chamber where you just continually are hearing ideas from the same places, and the same places are accruing funding, and it's hard for new people to break in through the door. And so the second way that we've thought about partnerships is for a couple of programs, we've actually set up like incubators or accelerators for really small new things, so that we have the ability to spot possible partners, possible ideas, possible teams that we would want to bet on that we wouldn't have been able to find otherwise. And so one example of this is we started a program with 4 universities across America. They're all sort of in the middle of the country. They're all public institutions that are the local economic mobility engines for their communities. And we said to those universities, like, we want you to start a process where you'll find crazy new ideas in your community, because we don't think there's enough philanthropic money that's flowing there. And over the course of a couple of years, we worked with them to identify those teams, to support those teams, and ultimately to help those teams start fundraising and working on the problems that they cared about. So way one for us is this sort of like ever blossoming circle of networks. And way two is when you're concerned that the networks aren't going to get you broad enough reach, how can you build new engines to find ideas and to support them from very early stages? That's how we think about it. I think everybody approaches this a little bit differently. And, to your point, I think that I think there's a lot of geographic variation in this one as well.
Okay. Sorry. For my Millennium Fellowship project, I carried out a medical outreach where we reached out to 1,000 women and children. We tested them for malaria, and then we gave them treatments, mosquito nets, and all of that. So do you mind sharing opportunities for us from maybe outside the country where we can have partners that will be interested in, being involved in this, so that we can have more impact in reaching out to more number of people?
Yeah, so I'm happy to, I'll drop my contact information into the chat. I think that the answer for who the best partners to work with will be is, as you know, really variable depending on the problem area, the type of approach you're taking, the geography. So I won't be able to answer that in any sort of uniform way, but just so that folks know, I'll go ahead and drop my email into the chat for now.
Okay, thank you so much, Casey. So I guess everyone can see the chat box. Her email address is there. With this, we end the session of question answer session from the fellows. Thank you to all the fellows who asked question and who were there to listen, Casey. Thank you to Casey for her wonderful insights and wisdom. If you have any closing remarks, Casey, you can just give it, and then we can end the session. Any closing remarks that you have?
My only closing remark is just thank you all for your thoughtful questions, for your time, and in some of your cases, for your sacrifice of sleep. And I hope you have a fantastic weekend ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, Casey and Team MCN for having me for today's session. With this, I would like to also inform the fellows that we are going to have our next global webinar on November 9th at 1 p.m. With Matt Patsky, who is the CEO of Trillium Asset Management. So I would request all of you to be there. Okay, Cassie wants to say something. Yeah.
One more thing. We're launching this program that I talked about, Rise, in less than 2 weeks. And one thing that I would love all of your help with is once we announce it, if you know young people that would be a good fit for this program, if you know anyone anywhere in the world, 15 to 17, doesn't matter what discipline they're interested in, we want to meet them. So to the extent any of you have folks that you think this would be a good fit for, we would just deeply appreciate your help getting out the word about this, because you're going to know people that we won't, and we would love to meet them.
Thank you so much. Yeah. This is it. Thank you, Casey. And if due to time limitation, we could not answer, if there were some questions, we could not answer it. Thank you so much. And with this, we end the session. Thank you all the fellows for being here.